What's up, guys? This is Carter Thomas with Coin Mastery TV. Make sure you go to coinmastery.com/invest and sign up for the newsletter. Join us, get lots of free information all about cryptocurrency, financial revolution, making good decisions, and absolutely crushing it. Thank you for joining me. And most importantly, thank you guys for getting us to 40,000 subscribers. Super cool. And obviously couldn't have done that without you. So I appreciate all of you guys for spending the time and also for sharing this with your friends and coming back and helping out. So awesome. It's been really fun, and I can't wait to get this thing to the next level. So now it's time to hit it a high gear and get the rest of the world to start buying a little bit of Bitcoin, right? Get this thing really moving. So today, we are going to talk about a few things. We're going to talk about what's going on with the main markets, and I want to talk specifically about the decisions process that I went through yesterday, how it relates to price. I want to talk a little bit about altcoins, and I want to talk a little bit about how powerful rumors really are in this business. And I want to show you some numbers that have blown my mind. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on with Tezos. For anybody, even if you're not a Tezos buyer, if you didn't buy anything on the ICO, this will be informative. Talk a little bit about Bitmain and then do a flashback, because today is the 30-year anniversary of Black Monday, which I believe is the worst single day in stock market history, at least the US stock market. So let's get into it. So yesterday we were talking, I'm on the Bitcoin, I'm on the 1 hour right here. And yesterday we were kind of on our way up, right? We'd hit the bounce, we were on our way up, and I said that my buy orders were set right around 4,900. I should say my alerts were set as it went down to 5,000. I would lock and load, get ready, everything ready to go. Now, it didn't keep going down. It bounced and it came right back up. And it may seem like that is bad news, right? It may seem like, well, this is what I planned for, but it didn't go that way, so I missed out on all this money. And one thing that I've learned, and I hope that this is something that took a while. It took a long time to wrap my head around this. Is that there's really two outcomes in any successful trade or a trading scenario. And those two outcomes are, one, you get it right and you make money, or two, you don't lose money. Two positive outcomes. Like there's obviously the third outcome of you lose money, but we're going to mitigate that as much as we can. And so when I typically talk on average about buying at lower prices than maybe other people would, the reason why is that I've dollar cost averaged myself into a great position of big coins, of Bitcoin, Ethereum, just like the PDF that if you guys have from the /invest URL, that is what I do as well. So I have a good amount of Bitcoin. The only reason I care about dips like this is to disproportionately add more to the pot that's already just going every week. It'll buy a little bit more every time, or we'll send an order every week and it'll go. And so when I set my bids, it's not about trying to get the best deal or trying to get it right or anything. What it's really about is what is the lowest possible, or I should say the highest possible price that's going to have the least amount of risk to it. So when I look at this chart, right, knowing that I'm not a massively technical trader, but I do have a lot of friends that are really good technical traders, and they can help me. And that's, in many ways, that's just as good as being a good technical trader, is having somebody else who could walk you through it. But I tend to look at things like resistance and support more than anything else. A little bit of Fibonacci, but mostly this. And I really just look at what are the places that if it hits, the chances of it continuing to go down are pretty low. And you start to create that scenario in your head. So when I talked about 4,900, it wasn't necessarily about that I think it's going to go over 4,900. It's that I set my bids there because if it does go to 4,900, the chances of it dropping even more aren't that high versus if I bought it at 5,400 up here, right, on its way up. And that's just something I've learned, especially with the volume, where it's very hard to time any market. I mean, this isn't anything new. And so I just consistently dollar cost average my way in. And then when I want to have some extra cash to buy in, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not, if this doesn't fill, I don't care. I mean, it just doesn't really matter to my strategy. It's just a way to get very low risk entry points to supercharge my dollar cost averaging strategy. And that's it. So it didn't fill on this particular, in this 24-hour window. Will it fill again? I don't know. But as this, this current run, as this fills out, we'll see how it goes. If it goes up, if it goes sideways, if it goes down, and I will adjust these accordingly, these levels accordingly, right? If it goes way up, then this may change to something else. I still don't like this thing right here, right around 4,900, that chart imperfection, but so it goes. But I think that's something to keep in mind, is the information that you guys have from that PDF is the exact same thing that I've been doing. And more importantly, that is by far the thing that has had the best return for the amount of work, the amount of risk, the amount of headache. And then when you have these really, really huge dips, like we talked about the other day, that's when you can deploy other amounts of capital. And then you get into capital management and having enough cash available and generating cash in other places to put into crypto. But that's really what it is. And I would encourage everybody, when you're looking at your buy orders, it should feel a little uncomfortable with how low it is. It should never feel like, oh man, if this doesn't fill, I'm going to miss out, right? If that's what it is, then you are not in a balanced portfolio position. It should feel like when it fills, you got a smoking deal. And that's how you should really be looking at any sort of one-time buy-in. Everything else should really just be an automated buy-in into the big coins or to any coin that you really like, where you just consistently buy in, or you're waiting for a dip so that you're getting a smoking deal. And that way you won't feel like, oh, I missed it this time. What am I going to do? Because then it puts you on defense, and on defense, you don't make good decisions. So I think nothing's really changed on my plate. I think that as this thing goes up, great. We'll see what happens with it next. I think there's a lot of stuff up in the air right now. I think there's a lot of things with regulation. There's a lot of new money that's ready to come in. There's a lot of, I think this Tezos thing, which we'll talk about, is going to open up the doors for valuations, value versus valuations, which we've talked about a lot. But I'm just going to let this thing ride, and wait for some other big volume, for some other big price action before I make any other moves. But just keep slowly buying in and doing that. Let's go over to Bittrex. There's two things in Bittrex that I want to talk about. The first thing is, let me go back to the first page here, is unobtainium. And if you didn't see, unobtainium is got this huge pump late on the 18th, so kind of throughout the day yesterday, and it's come back a good amount. I know nothing about unobtainium, just for the record, and it got massively pumped. Oops, let me scroll out here. A lot of people ask why I don't use that Bittrex to enhanced plugin anymore. It's just because it was becoming kind of a pain. It just took forever to render these charts, and I just use TradingView for the charts anyway, so that's the only reason why. No, nothing against it. But this unobtainium spiked, and I mean, anytime you see a candle like that go that big off of that small of a volume, it means that somebody just bought up the entire order book. I mean, it's pretty textbook right there. But this is what I want to talk about. Look at this. There's an alert at the top of this that says this market will be deleted on October 20th. And this was not here, right around here. But where it was is if you go up to help, you go to site status, you scroll down and you click this box, only show wallets with status updates, and you go to market notices, you'll see that that's where they announce what's going to come down. And so when you go back and you look at the profile of what just happened on Obtainium, the first place you always look is the charts, because the charts really is just, that's the illustration of every other factor there is. The charts really do tell the story. And this story, with relatively low volume, with that kind of price increase, I mean, that's almost 1,000% price increase right there, give or take, in a 30-minute candle. That means somebody just bought up the entire order book, especially since the volume was so low before that. And that sparked this whole second pump and dump. And it was all driven off the fact, for the most part, that this is going to be delisted. That they knew that if they there was a way to get urgency around it, that there was a way to drive the price way up, and if it attracted a lot more volume on the second pump, they could dump maybe way more of their accumulation that they had from before at a higher price, which you can see on the sustained volume. So let me say that again. Let's say you're a whale, or you're somebody who'd owned this for a long time, and you realize that this was going to get delisted, which is not necessarily a death sentence, but it is probably not good news anytime soon, just because Bittrex and Binance just hold so many eyeballs. So if you own a ton of Obtainium and you saw that it was going to get delisted and you needed a way to unload it, one way you could do it is to manipulate the market, manipulate the perception of what's happening. So you would buy up the entire order book, right? So if you were logged in, you go to the asks and go to like page 5 and set your buy at that price. And you would buy every single person that's willing to sell you at that price, which wouldn't even be that much Bitcoin before, because there's not a lot of volume, right? And that would cause a huge price increase. Now, you would be eating that price increase, so you can't necessarily unload shares because there's no one else to take it. But by creating a 300, 400% drive up in price, you're going to get on the front page of Bittrex. And guess who's going to see that? The thousands and thousands of other people that refresh Bittrex every day, that look for the outliers and wonder if they're missing out on something. So obviously the price is going to come down because it was a fake pump. Like, this is either coordinated or with one or two people probably. The price comes down because some of the people who are holders, they would sell it off and the price would come down. And then there was a second pump because there's probably people that wanted to make sure that they got into it and that they didn't miss out or whatever. But the kicker is, with this second pump, look at this, the volume is 383 Bitcoin. On this initial pump, there was 75 Bitcoin volume. That's both buying and selling. So if this was one person and they bought this all the way up, when they get to this second pump, they now have enough volume where they potentially could unload all of this previous low cost on Obtainium. And this premium, all this like high priced on Obtainium that they bought, there really wasn't much of it. It just moved the price so far up to attract new people to absorb the months or weeks or whatever that they had spent accumulating on Obtainium. So it really just pulled a lot of people into the mix who got interested so that they could dump all their coins onto. And they attracted people by buying up a very weak order book. So I think that it's obviously a very risky play. It's not necessarily an ethical play, but it is something that people do, and that it makes you realize that this is just completely artificial. There's, it is what it is. And you can go and find all the news you want, but the charts will tell you, with that kind of volume, with that kind of buy up, that's in that short of a time frame, that was manipulation. There's no way to get around it, especially as it's getting delisted. So very interesting. Always trying to uncover the, not necessarily how to capitalize on these, but what are the motives of these? Because again, going back to what we just talked about, it's not really about making money on the trades. That's really hard to do. What you really care about is, how do I not lose any money? And this is being able to be objective about situations like this will help you not lose money. Oh, the second thing, which I guess I'll come back to in a second, real quick, Binance got a new redesign. It looks great. So if you haven't, go check that out. It's a lot easier to read now. A lot of these coins are getting hit. I will tell you one coin that I've been learning more about, and this comes from a few people in the Coin Master community have turned me on to this. Check out Chainlink. Where is it? Now, the hard part about Chainlink is it's very difficult to read this chart because it's so new, right? Like, even you go to the 1 day, like there's not a lot of data here. So for a chart reader, there's not much you can do, but I would encourage you to go check out the website. I bought a little bit of Chainlink, not enough to really move the needle or anything, but they've got something cool going on. They're actually located right down the street. So I'm going to see if I can go meet those guys, find out what the story is. Anyway, it could be cool if it does. It's kind of a high valuation though, but we'll see. But I have been researching them. Not a big holding, but whatever. The other thing I wanted to talk about is Zencash. Many of you probably saw this. I do not own, I should say that. I own a little bit of Zencash, but like a couple $100 worth, not Lambo money or anything. But check this out. Now this is a very different story than what we just looked at, right? Let's zoom out for a second. Let's look at the 1 day. And you can see this has kind of been a slow, at least when it's been listed on Bittrex, it's been a slow down. Then it had a little bit of an upswing in September. Now it's down. And now on the 1 day, you're getting some massive candles. If we go back into the 30-minute candles, there's a bit of a run up, there's a bit of a spike, and there's a second big surge. But the way that this is set off and the way that the volume has been working out, this is much different than a coordinated manipulation dump like we just saw. And here's what's happening with Zencash. I mentioned this yesterday around Navcoin, which incidentally is getting dumped pretty hard because Navcoin was originally being rumored that they were going to get featured by this huge newsletter called Palm Beach, something that's very expensive. And Zencash yesterday was, somebody posted on 4chan in our Reddit and other places that the Palm Beach Confidential, which I think has like 160,000 subscribers or something, is going to feature Zencash. And what they did is they went and looked through Zencash's old presentation from a week ago, and they found a slide. Let me pull this up for you right here. They found a slide where the guy who owns Zencash said, hey, I talked to the guy who writes this newsletter. And the Zencash guy also did a YouTube video where he talks about, oh, hey, we talked for an hour and they're going to do a big write-up on us and blah, blah, blah. And there's been just rumors flying everywhere. And who knows if this is true? I mean, you can post anything you want on these forums, but there's just massive amounts of these threads. And if you look through all the different forums, there's these things are just, they grow like wildfire. And at first you may think, oh, hey, whatever, these are forums. Who's ever going to, believe this? But you look back over here, this is serious volume. I mean, that's 1,700 Bitcoin in a 24-hour stretch. This is no joke. And what this means is that these rumors, if they have the right story, whether this is true or not, look at what this can do for a price. I mean, it doubled the price of for more than just a pump. Like this is like a real run up in price. And if it is true, like who knows what will happen. But this is like how much people are willing to bet on something, on a rumor being true. This is why it's always buy the rumor, sell the news. And obviously you don't really want to buy the rumor when it's on the way up. Buying candles is a highly risky situation. But what this has shown me, and what I think that I would encourage everybody to think about, is one, this is why it's so important to get information early and to get information that other people don't have. Because if it's good information, you start buying in down here. And if I had the ability to to find good information and to proliferate that, I mean, that would be amazing. But that's part of the game. I don't necessarily have that. I try to get it. I try to make my calls accordingly, but it's few and far between. The other thing is that you never want to underestimate the power of how much a story can move a price, and how much people are dying for a good story to work in these markets right now. And they will throw millions and millions of dollars to make it a self-fulfilling prophecy in a lot of ways. And people will scalp along the way, and there'll be big traders. I was watching these order books last night, and it was unbelievable to see the amount of manipulation. Guys putting up, or men and women, I don't know who it was, putting up 40, 50 Bitcoin buy walls and then putting 50 Bitcoin sell walls, just moving the price back and forth just to wash trade it, because they knew that this was just driven on hype, on speculation, on total rumors. So my personal opinion is that this is the hardest thing in the world to not try to buy into. It really is. And I wish that there was a way that we could hack this, that a system that existed, but there isn't. The only way to get above this is to get info to buy in down here. And if you don't get info, you go and do research and determine really good products, really good teams, really good visions, really good market, like everything you do to determine a good product, a good company. And you start to accumulate when things are low, when everyone else says like, oh, that coin's dead, no one likes that, that's done, whatever. And then knowing that down the road there will be not necessarily hype like this, but there'll be good news, that's when you make the real big money. But when you try to ride these trends, when you're guessing, especially when you see it keeps going up and there's a lot of people buying it, it feels like this has to be true. And that's when you get yourself into a lot of trouble. And it's hard. It's hard to watch this. It's hard to watch it keep going up and not want to get involved. But what this has proven to me is that we are not even close to the point where fake news or rumors or market manipulation, this is still a huge part of the ecosystem. And you can take a seemingly very, very small coin and in a matter of hours turn it into one of the top volume coins on Bittrex. So stay smart, go change those candles. Who knows what's going to happen with Zencash? I mean, if these guys do release it, then the price may go up. But again, I mean, that's not a good risk reward. You want to make sure you don't lose money instead of, versus make money. One thing I will say is that if they don't release it and this thing completely tanks, these guys just got a ton of free marketing. And there's probably going to be a really good price to get in. I'm not saying I'm going to buy any, but that would put you in a better position, right? That would give you a bit of an advantage over the average person who's emotionally distraught that they just lost that they had to sell it off. So anyway, let's talk about Tezos. If you don't know about Tezos, Tezos was famously one of the first big uncapped ICOs that happened. Their product is similar to Bitcoin, but their big unique selling proposition is that they're trying to revamp governance, which is hilarious. That's what happened. What that means is that these things, how we see on Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin 2x, Segwit 2x. And it causes all this drama where people disagree and they need to go have meetings and decide on things and consensus. Tezos was trying to put that on the blockchain so that there was always a way to automatically or use computers and blockchain to agree on things so that you never had to have humans deciding on stuff. That was their big thing, which is a huge problem. If you're interested in governance, go check out Aragon. That's a really good coin. The prices, they've had a terrible time in the market, so I don't expect that thing to go up anytime soon. But they've done a really good job. They're San Francisco based, and they have a lot of information on governance. And that's what Tezos was trying to do. But what happened is that Tezos, this woman, Kathleen, and her husband built the code, and then they partnered with a couple people who were almost like advisory roles, but they had pretty big stakes. One of which was very involved in a Swiss area called Zug, Z-U-G, and they created this cryptocurrency haven where they wanted, it's almost like an incubator town for crypto. Anyway, that really backfired because now there's all this contention about rules and who owns what and a million other things that's causing Tezos to just really fall apart. And if you go and look at the futures market, you can look on BitMEX or you can go look on any futures market. Tezos is just getting murdered right now because there's just people that have no idea what's going to happen with this coin. There's complete disarray in the management of the company, especially since it's a governance-based coin, which is whatever. And what's interesting to me on a personal note is that I was listening to Kathleen, one of the founders, and Jason Calacanis, who is an investor in San Francisco. He has a podcast called This Week in Startups, and he interviewed Kathleen kind of as a skeptic of ICOs, being like, "Can you explain to me why you got this much money?" And she was walking through the whole process, and everything about it was very black and white around like governance and how blockchain is going to solve all our problems. But she talked about how there was these three people that really could dictate the big decisions and the big vision of the company. And Jason said, "Well, how do you know they're going to do it?" And her response was along the lines of, "Well, we all have the same vision. We all know where we're going, and it's very crystal clear." And that, to me, I remember thinking to myself, you never rely on group consensus to have the same vision for the long term. It just doesn't happen. People change their mind, situations change. People always disagree on stuff. That's why you have to be so black and white, which is what blockchain can do. And it's funny that is the very thing that's potentially going to be a huge downfall. Are these guys done? No. But the futures value of their ICO prices just tumbled completely. And it may come back, but this is a very good example of people drive everything. Famous saying is like, markets don't rip you off, people do. Or, money doesn't screw you, people screw you, or whatever the thing is. And I think that this is a good example of how no matter how good the idea is, no matter how good the team is, emotions will always be an issue. And when there's a lot of money involved, emotions tend to run very quickly. In terms of how this affects you, if you own Tezos, I do not know what's going to happen with this. I think that historically, if it's a great product, if they continue to move forward, they can survive. But this is uncharted waters, right? The emotional toll on continuing to stay fired up about a product after you've gone through something like this is a big piece of the puzzle. It's hard to just leave that behind. It can almost be PTSD for engineers, if you want to call it that. But I think that this is really interesting. I think that this is also really interesting in terms of how visionary engineers and regulators are going to come together or clash together. And the freedom and the flexibility that one might have may not fit into the mold that the other have. And one of the best ways to mitigate that is to have coins or have teams that want to work with regulators, that are looking at compliance, they're proactively working with the SEC or the CFTC or any of the global regulatory firms. NEO being a good example of that. Project 0x. Even Coinbase does this a lot. Aragon. They all actively are trying to be working with regulators. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get preferential treatment. It just means that they're removing risk of things like this happening. But this is interesting. Sometimes for big regulation to come down, the regulatory divisions need a scapegoat story. Will this be the scapegoat story that makes them come out swinging? I don't think so, but something is going to be. A couple more things before we wrap this up. Looks like Bitmain, which is Jihan's company. He owns he owns, I think he's the biggest Bitcoin mining equipment supplier in the world by a long shot, actually. And it looks like they have been hacked. I don't even know how exactly you really verify this. Let me see if there's any new results. Maybe not. But it looks like there's some rumors flowing around. Like I said, these aren't completely verified by Bitmain themselves, but they have been hacked, which is really interesting to think about because, one, if you've bought something from Bitmain, make sure you got all your authentication and all that really dialed in, because that list is going to get sold to somebody. The other thing is that they're obviously a target, right? You're going to see when there's no rules and when people have a lot of money at stake that they can easily get, easily in quotes, that the targets on people's backs go bigger. So Jihan and Bitmain are huge Chinese company and very big proponents of Bitcoin Cash, which is a highly controversial thing. The other day, one of the Bitcoin core developers, this guy Jameson Lop, you may have seen him. Somebody called the police and said that he was holding a hostage or something. It's like police came to his house. Like all this crazy stuff where if people don't like what you're doing, or if they want to create tumultuous times in the markets, this kind of stuff can happen. I don't think it necessarily is going to impact Bitcoin Cash's price. Not that Bitcoin Cash's price is doing anything spectacular right now, but it does open you up to, as soon as something gets controversial, they become a target acquired, right? Because for the exact same reason why this rumor about Palm Beach Confidential can move these markets around Zencash, this sort of thing can move the markets around Bitcoin Cash or around Bitcoin. I mean, it can do a whole host of things that can really destabilize the markets. Because if you think about it, if Bitmain goes down and they lose market share on the mining equipment, somebody else becomes a big miner, maybe in a different country, that has huge implications for a lot of different things. So always good to keep your eye on this, especially to see where the power is shifting or where it shifts. Finally, 30 years ago today, Sergeant Pepper told this, I'm just kidding. This was Black Monday, even though today is Thursday. And it was, the worst day on Wall Street or whatever. Massive emotion. It's actually pretty interesting to watch people's reaction to. You can Google videos and see traders. Hey, here's where I was on the floor, and here's what it was like. It's interesting how they had, I think it was 20 or 25% drop in one day or 22.6% in one day. And the reason why I think this is important is, one, is that superstition is whatever, you can be superstitious, but markets are not superstitious. Nobody cares about superstition. So the fact that this is 30 years ago today, that's not a real reason. But what I find most interesting is that is a 22.6% drop. And this was considered one of the biggest, most terrifying moments in financial history, both for traders, for banks, and for consumers, because of the unknown. And this is when you deal with $50 trillion in capital markets, obviously that is a very, very big deal. I don't want to dismiss that. I guess the stock market was probably closer to like 5 trillion, or maybe not even that in 1987, maybe like 3 trillion. But still, it's a huge issue. We have gone through, I should say, 40% swings. Let me go back to the daily on Bitcoin. We go through 20 to 40% swings over and over and over. And I can tell you what, it's not going to change. If we're going to get growth like this, you better believe we're going to get 20 to 40 to 80% drops again. It's always going to happen. And then it'll come back up and the same thing will happen. And that's just what has always happened, what will always happen. And what's a blessing in disguise in many ways, and why people often will tell you that you're crazy or that you're delusional or that this is, doesn't make any sense, is because this is what people consider to be the greatest, like the end of days, is 22.6%, because this is the only market in town. And for us, we're used to massive volatility. And this, I believe, is what gets into the greater psychology of being a holder, of being in cryptocurrency, is being able to handle huge drops and not have it be a Black Monday. Being able to realize that, of course, this is going to go down at some point. Markets always, it has to. I'm not saying it's going to go, crash. But even if it did, it'll come back. It always will. And there's opportunity along the way. And I'm not necessarily get numb to it, but realize that the ability to withstand a large drop is a very, very powerful skill. The ability to just hang tight and to hold, knowing that we will come back over and over, is what makes this special. It's what makes it early. It's what makes the reward outweigh the risk. And so whenever you look, I'm a big fan of looking at history and reading through history and understanding how people reacted in history, how people predicted and how people reacted in history, because I think that tells a lot about who the winners really are. Anytime you see these kind of things, you realize that the people that came out ahead, they either held and then a couple years later, everything was back to normal, or they had cash available that they could deploy when everyone else was terrified. I was listening to a podcast last night when I was going for a run, and it was talking about how there's always, the seasons of the year and the seasons of the economic cycles and the seasons of the centuries and everything, and how you go through winters in order to kill off everything that can't survive for the spring. And that's really what this is. It's a great news story, but that's all this is. And we're going to continue to see that. What does winter look like in crypto? I don't know. I mean, is it a slow down here and then a huge spike? Is it a sharp drop and then a fast spike up? Is it just way parabolic and then we have another dip, but we're up at 25,000 already, so who cares? I don't know. But the more you can recognize how people react in these huge situations, the better prepared you are going to be to just hold tight as these dips move forward, and maybe even capitalize on some of the dips. Excuse me. But I'm always fascinated with this. I'm really interested in history about this, and as it relates to crypto, and as it relates to making better decisions, keeping a level head, and just playing the long game. That's where the money is. Money is not in 2017. The money is in 2022. That's where you're going to wake up and be like, really glad I didn't freak out when it went down 25%. So it's going to be a great journey. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me today. 40,000 subscribers. It's been a great times. And let's get to 50. I'll see you guys then. Peace out.